So on the 8th of March, we saw the long-awaited release of the next chapter in the Kung Fu Panda franchise with the release of Kung Fu Panda 4. Now it's been out for a little while, around 2 weeks or so, but annoyingly the release dates were staggered, so Australia was only just getting it this weekend, which is frustrating, but it is what it is, I guess. But yeah, just saw the movie, but before I went, I wanted to see how it had been going, if it had been a success both critically and commercially, and so off to the Rotten Tomatoes I went. And well, it seems to be doing pretty well for itself. As of writing, it has a 71% critical score, which by the standards of the franchise is actually rather low in retrospect. Like, they always get critical scores above the 80% mark, so this is about 10% off the pace of the next lowest rated by critics, which was Kung Fu Panda 2. So yeah, not exactly the outcome you were hoping for, but it's not a bad score either, I think. In terms of its audience score though, as of right now, it has the highest in the franchise, sitting on 86%. So, you win some, you lose some. But we'll come back to the reception in a little bit. But first we gotta talk financials, right? This thing's doing pretty well. For reference, Kung Fu Panda grossed $631 million worldwide. 2 grossed $665 million all up. And 3 grossed $525 million all up. And those are from their total runs. But so far, 4 has grossed $202 million. As of writing this, it's probably more by now. And it topped the US box office for the first 2 weekends of its release, and seemed to be coming in hot for its third weekend, whilst also opening up in additional countries along the way. So it's doing very well for itself so far. And in all honesty, I wouldn't be shocked if it actually breaks the record for the franchise in terms of its box office. Just a feeling I've got. Hell, I mean, it was already the best opening for a DreamWorks film since 2012, which is when Madagascar 3 came out. And geez, I just took a look at the DreamWorks filmography since that movie released, and this movie, it is well and truly chasing some of those films down, already overtaking the lesser grosses. So yeah, I'd say it's doing very well for the studio financially. And so I guess we can all agree that this bad boy is going to have even more sequels to follow up on. It just makes sense. Like, look at the last couple of DreamWorks movies. Bad Guys grossed $250 mil. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, $485 mil. Ruby Gillman bombed with $46 million. Ugh. Trolls Band Together, $200 million. In 2 weeks! 2 weeks! Kung Fu Panda pretty much caught up to all of those, except for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And Puss in Boots did not open nearly as strongly as this film, which indicates that it's going to catch it too. Po is a draw at the box office. That's all there is to it. People want to see some fat-ass pandas whooping ass and using magical kung fu powers. Hell, I know I do. That's exactly what I'm interested in. Then combine that with the overt silliness of the world of Kung Fu Panda and some top-tier voice acting, and you're cooking. So yeah, I expect that for DreamWorks as well, much like Disney, we're going to be seeing an era of sequels to films that are proven draws. More Shrek, maybe more Madagascar. It's been a long time since the third one. Maybe it's time for a fourth. But yeah, this film's done very well for itself, and I very much enjoyed it. Like, immensely enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, but I did notice that whilst the scores are good, although I do feel like its critical score is a bit low, I don't really see how it's worse than the third movie at all, but whatever. And whilst it's making money hand over fist at the moment, there does seem to be a rather vocal portion of the internet that doesn't like it. Or maybe I'm being a bit too harsh on that. Maybe it's more that they're a bit disappointed in the film, but honestly for me, it's such a damn good movie. Just a recap on the plot to get things cooking, spoilers ahead obviously. Kung Fu Panda 4 follows well. Po, as he comes to the realization that his time as the Dragon Warrior is rapidly coming to an end. However, he's in denial about this fact, much to the consternation of Master Shifu. And so after a thief named Zhen attempts to steal his Staff of Wisdom, and upon hearing that a villain named the Chameleon is on the prowl, he teams up with Zhen to head to Juniper City, confront the Chameleon, and save China once again. However, after a series of mishaps and adventures within the city, Po and Zhen bust into the palace, only for Zhen to betray Po, and reveal that she'd been working for the Chameleon the entire time. But after Po supposedly murdered, she has a change of heart, and the two of them team up to fight against the Chameleon, who's just stolen the powers of various different deceased heroes and villains from the franchise, including characters like Tai Lung. And so they gather an army of their own, and alongside Po's dad's, and the aforementioned army of thugs, they take the fight to the Chameleon and her army, and the pair team up to take her down completely. And at the end, Po realizes that his time as the Dragon Warrior has come to an end, and it's time for him to succeed Oogway as the next spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace. And he takes Zhen on as his apprentice to become the next Dragon Warrior. And okay, so since we've just recapped the movie itself, we better talk about what was awesome, right? And we'll start with the story, like I mentioned. For the most part, I'd say this. It was a solid storyline, a strong narrative, one that's interesting and engaging. Is it anything revolutionary or game-changing? No, but that's not the draw of Kung Fu Panda, is it? You're there for a popcorn movie. Something that, well, not to disparage the franchise, but we're not here for a deep narrative for the most part. Yes, there's deeper themes and whatnot, And you see those across all 4 of the films. I'm not denying that. And I'm not saying that the story is bad, because it isn't. It's perfect for what they're trying to do, but the overarching tale comes in 3rd place behind the character personalities and character relationships and dynamics, but especially behind epic kung fu action. And so with that in mind, I think this rather simple story, following Po and Jen as they make their way to Juniper City, and the chaos that follows in their wake, the betrayal, the final conflict, it all makes sense and it works very well. And really, it's just there to enhance things, make the action more exciting because there's a few more stakes, and also have a backdrop for the development of these new characters. I especially enjoyed the side story where Po's 2 dads go off on their own adventure in order to try to find and protect Po from the dangers he might face along the way. That was a lot of fun. I think my only problem was maybe the film could have gone on for another 10 minutes or so because it was so well paced. Right up to the point where Jen betrays Po and reveals she's in league with the chameleon. Because then she has her change of heart and switches side to join Po, all within like 5 to 10 minutes, which to me is not enough time to cook with this storyline. And so whilst it was fine for what it was, I did come away from that section feeling things were a tad rushed. It didn't fully live up to its potential. But that was really my only major concern with the narrative side of things. For the rest, I legitimately think they hit this out of the park. At a stretch, maybe I feel like they didn't include as much of the mystical side of things as they used to back in previous installments. Felt much heavier on the action movie side of things and the development of those character bonds. To the point that at times, it did steer away from Po growing in terms of his spiritual power. Like, I get that part of the story is letting go of his need to be the Dragon Warrior, but it does feel like that ending where he decides, well, that's me done. It comes a bit out of nowhere, and we don't see enough of the shift to see him become the mentor type character. For the most part, she leads him around by the nose, he bumbles through things, and then right at the end, he flicks the switch. So, like Jen, I think his arc in the story probably needed another 10 or so minutes to really shine, really pop, but beyond that, everything was really good. And then in terms of the characters, I thought the returning characters were just as fun as always. Po is just the best, as is his goose dad, but I'll be honest, I originally did not care about his panda dad in Kung Fu Panda 3. But this time around, I found it to be super funny. So their scenes, they were a whole lot of fun. Shifu was glorious in his hate for life and his constant disappointment in how Po surpasses him in every single respect without even trying very hard. Zhen was fun and provided a different character dynamic for Po to bounce off of, to almost be the more experienced character, trying to dole out some wisdom. And I know that Aquafina is in a whole heap of voice roles as of late, but I thought she was really good here. She gets a lot of hate, but I think she suited the character. Just good stuff, you know? I think maybe the chameleon was a little bit thin as a character and didn't have the same presence as the first 3 villains, but I think that's the point. She was never more than a plot device to build up the character of Zhen. She doesn't need to have that depth as much as the others do, because ultimately her backstory combines into Zhen's backstory. It gives Zhen something to strive to be better than. And so from that point of view, whilst I get why people wouldn't be high on it, I do think it was on purpose to allow them to focus on other elements of the film. On top of that, I thought graphically the film looked amazing, really, really good, and I'm pretty sure that this is supposed to be the final film that's made in-house at DreamWorks, right? So that's a little bit sad. Hopefully the other studios are able to replicate that magic if they continue with the franchise, which, once again, DreamWorks would have to be employing utter hacks as their creative and business heads if they don't continue with this. More sequels, please. The music, as always, just top tier, especially the cover of Baby One More Time by Tenacious D. Oh man, that song is peak! I love that DreamWorks does that kind of thing so often. Just gets their voice cast to do covers of classic songs that become absolute bangers. Who can forget The Fairy Godmother's Holding Out for a Hero? Or Puss and Donkey's version of Livin' La Vida Loca? Or just Far, Far Away Idol in general? Bring it back, I say. Screw American Idol, screw Australian Idol, X Factor, Got Talent, The Voice. Who needs them? Far, Far Away Idol. Do it, DreamWorks, you cowards. Absolute bangers. But yeah, great soundtrack, really great voice performances. Kung Fu Panda never misses in that respect. The voice talent gives it their all, and then the action. I've seen some complaints about the action, but I just don't get it. The action scenes here were so good. Like, I've noticed that this decade, DreamWorks fight scenes and just action scenes in general have been very well done. Last Wish, Bad Guys, this. DreamWorks is cooking. What are you talking about? Pull your head in, champ. But, you know, we'll see if that carries over after they've outsourced. Hope so. And so, I'm left wondering what's disappointing here. Why am I seeing so many videos in my recommendeds and posts and whatnot telling me about how this film is apparently the worst thing ever, a failure, a disappointment, despite every single metric suggesting otherwise? So I wasted a good couple of hours of my life diving into that swimming pool of salty, salty tears to have a look at what they're saying, to just give my thoughts on some of it. So yeah, forgive me if this is a bit of a jumbled mess, but there was just so much salt, I'm dehydrated. I need a glass of water. Anyway, a big complaint I saw was that people were salty that the mantle of the Dragon Warrior was passed off to a character like Zhen, rather than to fan favourite Tigress. And it's like, is the whole idea of Tigress not that she's just a great kung fu warrior? She's a leader, a hero, a friend, but that's not what makes the Dragon Warrior. It isn't about wisdom or skill or ability or strength or otherwise. If it was, Po would never have been chosen in the first place. The whole idea of the Dragon Warrior, at least from my perspective, is making a legend out of nothing. It seems like the Dragon Warrior was envisioned as Oogway's pipeline into developing a successor for himself. The Dragon Warrior eventually becomes the spiritual leader, and eventually when they die, the next Dragon Warrior retires, becomes a spiritual leader, names a new Dragon Warrior, and on we go. And so I feel like Oogway's whole intention here was to create a hero, create a legend that could be anybody. That's why Po fits, because he was just some fat panda noodle man. He was not the archetypal hero. He was of the people, a fan of kung fu just like everybody else in town. And so that could inspire more common people to be a hero, to lift themselves up. Remember, Oogway was a tortoise. I guarantee people at first would have scoffed at him too being a mighty warrior. And so, instead of a muscly tiger, this grand warrior of legend being a street smart little fox, I think it makes a lot of sense based on the themes that we're dealing with here. And I think it would be a very inspirational story in the lore, wouldn't it? The street urchin, the street rat that became a hero. Sounds great. Feels like that's the whole point of the Dragon Warrior, to inspire rather than just be the strongest fighter. And I think a character like Zhen would be able to readily do just that. So nah, it's not a random decision, it's not out of nowhere, it makes sense and it fits with the whole vibe of Oogway's legacy. On top of that, I saw a bunch of upset fans talking about how it was cheap to not have the Furious Five. And you know, I actually thought so too first. As in, when I was watching the trailers and hearing they wouldn't be in it, I did get in my feelings a bit and have a sook. That's online, you can find it. But honestly, having watched the movie, I just don't see where they could fit in. Like, the reality is, if you simply reuse the same characters in every single movie, the formula's going to get stale. DreamWorks needs hits, that's the reality. A lot of their films don't make a whole heap of money, so these sequels, right now, they're guaranteed cash flow. This is a bankable franchise, and so you can't afford to let it grow stale, but it will if you simply add all these characters into the franchise, because it forces you to focus on them. Because I think it would be even worse to have them appear and for them to follow Po and Jen around whilst having no relevance or dialogue at all. Imagine how pissed people would be. But by shifting the focus to fit them, suddenly you take away from either Po or Jen. And since the whole crux of the film is about Po moving from warrior to mentor, this would kill the heart of the narrative being told. It would make things too busy and prevent the story being told completely. And on top of that, Tigress especially has always acted as the voice of reason for Po, an emotional support, somebody to lean on. If she's around, then I do think it would damage the role that Po plays, where he slowly takes Jen under his wing, under his paw, whatever, and changes her heart and mind, inspires her to change and do the right thing, and ultimately leading to her being named the Dragon Warrior. That's an important chapter of growth for Po, and Tigress being there to draw focus away would damage it. So they made the right call here. And now there's room for sequels to dive further into those fresh dynamics. Now you can have Zhen interact with the Furious Five, whilst also having that established dynamic with Po, which will in turn make future films feel more fresh. Let them keep milking this franchise for a couple more movies, like, surely. Another big complaint I've seen is that people are upset about how the villains panned out in this movie. Characters like Kai and Shen having no lines, which... Come on. No shit. What is this meant to be, a greatest hits compilation? They brought them out for some fun nostalgia. But who actually cares what they have to say? Certainly not the children who are the target audience. And beyond that, these two were just straight up evil in their movies. They're not like Tai Lung, who had a little bit of nuance and thus could add a little bit of something. They just suck, so who cares? What would they even say? We hate you, Po. Like, come on. Tai Lung, at least I get why people would be upset, but at the same time, if you make him the main villain, it's a massive rehash, and people are going to be mad anyway, because clearly they don't want him to be the villain. They want him to have a heroic arc, they want him to come back to life, they want him to be Po's sidekick. He should be the next Dragon Warrior, despite that being the whole point of the first one, why he should never be the Dragon Warrior. Ultimately, he was always meant to be a dark reflection of Po, the orphan who was taken in and raised by a single dad. So him coming to terms with his failures, seeing how Po continues to be a great hero years after his death, that's the right way to wrap him up. And how they even gave him one last hurrah, fighting the chameleon briefly before he gets cheap-shotted and has his powers stolen. If you play everything for nostalgia, eventually you're going to run into diminished returns. So I think they did the right thing. I honestly think that people overrate this guy massively. He is fun, that they act like he's the most nuanced and interesting villain ever made in the history of animation. Bro, he's a delusional psycho who Poe clapped when he was at his weakest. How do you possibly think he could be the main villain now? And why would you invest into this guy as a hero when it would pretty much force him to become the main character of the franchise? Every other character hates him. And so you'd need to shape the films to be completely about him earning their trust and forgiveness. What a waste of time. Like, once again, it's such a strange desire to me. Oh well. Then I also saw complaints about the chameleon. People saying that they didn't like she wasn't a warrior. It didn't make sense for her to be like that. It felt cheap, unearned. And so what? Ugh. Sometimes I wonder how people like this function. The whole point of her character is that she has a unique ability that has let her rule through fear. But she knows to take more power beyond the city, she has to legitimately get strong. But she's too lazy to bother putting in the work to fight. Hence why she's doing what she's doing. This feels so deeply obvious to me, and she makes excuses for it. That's the whole point. And I mean, honestly, I could go on and on and on about how I think these people are wrong, but they'll never change their minds, and it'll just drive me crazy. But just to leave you with some rage, I legit saw professional reviews, people who get paid to do this, saying shit like they were unhappy that the film was not serious enough, that Kung Fu Panda is not a popcorn film, and that this installment was too much of a kid's film. Come on. Like, let's put the cards on the table. There is no shame in enjoying these movies. But eventually it comes a time in everybody's life where you have to admit that they've been made with children in mind. And thus, they should go with the decisions that are going to make more kids happy. I even see people saying that they want Poe to be less goofy, less funny, and more grizzled and serious. I hope these people are never given creative power over DreamWorks or any other franchise, because they would bomb it into the ground with terrible character decisions that don't take into account their target audience and inherently do not understand the character at all. And so, no, I can't keep going because the salt is dehydrating me. I'm a shriveled prune. Farewell. And so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Kung Fu Panda 4? Did you like it? Dislike it? Any reason as to why? You want to hate on me for my opinions at the end here? That's fine, go for it. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.